Some warnings are best heeded, even if you don't understand them. Sometimes ignoring them isn't just foolish but fatal. What happens if you don't listen, and what happens if you do? Find out as you listen to this experience I had years back. It was late one autumn evening when I found myself walking down an eerily quiet street in a part of town I barely knew. The air was cold, and the streetlights flickered inconsistently, casting long, dancing shadows on the cracked pavement. I had just left a meeting that ran late, and my phone's battery had died hours ago. The silence of the night was only broken by the crunching sound of leaves beneath my boots. I've always considered myself a rational person. Ghosts, omens, and superstitions had no place in my world. But as I passed by an alley, a voice, frail yet sharp, cut through the stillness. "You need to be careful," the voice croaked. I stopped abruptly and turned to see an old woman standing a few feet away. Her hunched frame was wrapped in layers of tattered clothing, and her piercing eye seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to hide the unease that crawled up my spine. The old woman stepped closer, her movements deliberate but unsettlingly silent. "Something dark is following you," she whispered. Her voice carried an otherworldly weight, each word sinking into my mind like a stone in water. "You mustn't ignore it." I chuckled nervously, taking a step back. I think you have the wrong person." Her hand shot out and gripped my arm with surprising strength. Her skin felt like ice. "Mark my words," she hissed. "Pay attention to the shadows, or it will consume you." Uncomfortable and eager to leave, I yanked my arm free and hurried away without another word. I glanced back once, but the old woman had vanished, as if she had melted into the darkness. As I continued my walk, I couldn't shake off her words. The streets around me seemed to grow darker, and every flicker of the streetlights made my heart race. I told myself it was just a trick of my imagination, but then I started noticing things. The shadows seemed to move not in the way they should when a light flickered, but independently, as if they had a will of their own. I thought I heard faint footsteps behind me, perfectly matching my pace. When I stopped, the sound stopped. When I quickened my steps, so did the unseen presence. My breath quickened. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself. "Just my mind playing tricks." But deep down, I felt it. I was being followed. When I finally reached my apartment, I slammed the door shut and locked it. The quiet hum of the city outside felt like a relief. Shaking my head, I laughed nervously. "Crazy old lady," I said aloud, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. I turned on every light in my apartment and poured myself a glass of water. As I sipped it, I noticed my reflection in the window. Behind me, in the dim corner of the living room, something shifted. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing out of place. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted. Every shadow in the room seemed darker, heavier. As the night wore on, the strange occurrences escalated. My bedroom door creaked open on its own, though no draft could explain it. The lights flickered and buzzed. Then came the whispers, faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was menacing, filled with malice. Desperate for sleep, I crawled into bed and pulled the covers over my head like a frightened child. The whispers grew louder and closer. My eyes squeezed shut, and I silently begged for it to stop. After what felt like hours, the noises ceased. Exhaustion overtook me, and I finally drifted off. The next morning, I woke up to find my apartment in disarray. Furniture was overturned, picture frames shattered. On my mirror, written in a black, oily substance, were the words, "You ignored her." My hands trembled as I scrubbed the mirror clean, but the feeling of dread lingered. I decided to leave the apartment for the day, hoping the change of scenery would clear my mind. But as I walked through the bustling streets, I caught glimpses of something in my peripheral vision. A shadowy figure, just out of reach, seemed to follow me wherever I went. In the middle of the day, while I sat in a crowded cafe, my coffee cup suddenly slid across the table, spilling onto the floor. The waitress looked startled as she came over to clean up, and I muttered an apology. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't an accident. The shadow outside the window loomed larger and darker. That night, I sat in my living room, determined to confront whatever was tormenting me. I left all the lights off and sat in silence, waiting. Hours passed, and just when I thought nothing would happen, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged in the air. From the corner of the room, the shadow began to take shape. It stretched and twisted, growing taller and more defined. Slowly, it morphed into a figure, a hunched, frail silhouette that was eerily familiar. My blood ran cold as the entity stepped into the faint light, revealing its face. It was the old woman, or something that looked like her, grinning wickedly. Her voice, layered with a deep, guttural tone, echoed through the room. "I warned you." I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure began to move toward me, its form distorting with every step. Her grin widened to an unnatural degree, her jaw stretching impossibly low. Her eyes were black, bottomless voids, and locked onto mine. I couldn't move, I was paralyzed by an unseen force. The whispers returned, but this time, they were in my head. They weren't incoherent anymore. They chanted my name, over and over, each repetition louder, more insistent. I clutched my head, trying to drown out the sound, but it was useless. The lights in the room flickered violently, and the walls seemed to breathe. The entity's form began to shift again, and I realized with dawning horror that it was mimicking me. My posture, my movements, even my expressions, but unnaturally twisted and grotesque. It reached out with a hand that mirrored my own, but was dark and withered, its touch burning cold as it brushed against my face. "You will be mine," it hissed, the words reverberating in my skull. The entity began to shift and change, its features warping grotesquely. The twisted grin widened, the eyes hollowed out, and the skin sagged unnaturally. Before I could move, it lunged forward, and I realized, with chilling clarity, that the form it was taking was my own. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more chilling tales.